And thank you for joining us today, and welcome to this Chapelstreet Zoom/podcast that we're calling Marriage RX, Keeping Your Marriage Healthy During a Pandemic. I'm Pastor Brian Coffey, and this is my wife, Lorene, who is Director of Chapelstreet Women. And if you've been around Chapelstreet for any length of time, you know that although we have different roles at church, we both share a passion for encouraging marriages. And a couple of weeks ago, our senior leadership team approached us about trying to create some sort of a resource that would be encouraging to marriages of all ages as we all continue to navigate through this season of the COVID-19 pandemic.
But before we go any further, let's introduce our panel of couples that we have with us tonight. So Brenda and Ryan Saul, if you want to wave, I'll come back and introduce the four couples and then have you tell a little bit more about yourself. And then Brandon and Carrie Peterson, and Eric and Amy Elfman. And so let me circle back around and have you each take a few minutes and just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your families. And so Saul, why don't I start with you? If you can tell me a little bit about yourselves and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. We're looking forward to tonight. I'm Ryan Saul. This is my wife, Brenda Saul. We are from Batavia. We have 3 kids, a 17-year-old son, Charlie, a 16-year-old son, Henry, and a 12-year-old daughter, Sadie. And we have an English bulldog at 6 years old, Bella, that runs our house, actually. We've gone to Chapelstreet for about 6 or 7 years, and we've been married 20 years.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. And how about Petersons? How about you next?
I'm Brandon. This is my wife, Carrie. We've been going to Chapelstreet, well, since we've been married, which has been 11 years, and even longer than that. We have 3 boys, ages 10, 8, and 4. We live in Elburn, and is there any other?
We're excited to be here tonight.
Yep.
And how many years did you say you've been married?
11.
11 years. Okay. And you've been attending Chapelstreet for longer than that.
About 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
Great. Good to have you. All right. Thank you. And Elfman.
I'm Eric Elfman. This is my wife, Amy. We've been married 16 years, and we've been attending Chapelstreet I grew up in the church, and Amy shortly after that started coming and while she was in high school and we were dating. We have 2 daughters. Grace is a 7th grader at Rotolo Middle School in Batavia. She's 13. And our younger daughter, Gwen, is a 5th grader at Louise White, and she's turning 11 actually tomorrow. We also have some dogs that run the house. Chai is our mutt, and Kona is our new husky puppy who is currently locked up so he doesn't chew anything.
Well, great. We're so glad to have all of you, and we intentionally chose couples that were different life stages. So that's really helpful for us as we navigate through talking about some of the impact of COVID on marriages and couples. So thank you so much for being
Are we the old couple? Did I just gather that? We're the old couple.
Well, she didn't say it.
We're the old couple.
we got married when we were 14. So
Well, some of you on the panel, some of you guys may recognize this quote, and some of you watching may recognize this, especially if you were an English major. But the opening lines from Charles Dickens' classic novel, A Tale of Two Cities, goes like this. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Now, amazingly, Dickens didn't write those words this year. He wrote them in 1859, but they could easily be describing life as we've known it through 2020 and now into 2021. I think we all might agree, at least in some way, that the last year or so might qualify as the worst of times, most obviously because of the COVID pandemic that is still going on. We're all awaiting the word of vaccines and so forth, but not just anxiety over the virus, but then the sheltering in place, the working from home, the educating at home. They've all conspired to create stress in families and marriages. And throw on top of that political and social tension, and you have a recipe for a high level of stress, fatigue, dysfunction, and even conflict. But on the other hand, is it possible that 2020 and 2021 might also be the best of times? Maybe the reduced travel and work schedules have provided more time as a couple or as a family. Maybe the forced time at home has allowed some to grow in those relationships. Now, the purpose of this little Zoom podcast, Marriage RX, is to dive into all of this. And in order to help couples do a couple of things, to identify the common stress points of the season and to suggest, as we go forward, some healthy coping strategies for navigating through whatever remains of the season of COVID.
So we want to go back to you couples and hear from you, because we think that's going to be helpful for others to hear and be able to identify and learn together and be encouraged. So as you look back over the last 10 months or so, how has COVID specifically impacted your family, and what have been the stress points, challenges, or even some losses that you've experienced as a family? And so let me start with Ryan and Brenda, and then I'll follow up Eric and Amy with you and circle around Peterson's to you. But Ryan and Brenda, let me start with you. How would you respond to that? How COVID has impacted your family?
I think one of the ways we have felt it the most of the stage of life we are in is we have basically three teenagers, but two high schoolers. And really, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. They started going remote. Like, our one son was middle of freshman year, and by the time he hopefully goes back, he'll be a junior already. And all of that wasn't really school how we know it. My boys are athletes. I have one who wants to play in college. So just the loss of some of this stuff has been hard, and keeping a pulse on, are they okay? And how is this affecting them? So I would say that's what weighs on us the most.
Yeah.
Ryan also owns a business, and it's in the nursing home field. So, I mean, that's been a stressful, hard year, not only for himself, but the responsibility of the people who work with him. He feels that. So it's just been heavy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the emotional concern for the emotional state of your kids, and how it's affecting them, but the way you feel emotionally for your kids as well.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
We've been used to cheering them on at games, and there's none of that. We would travel as a family and go to each other's activities, and it's basically been no activities.
Yeah.
A little bit of a loss is our oldest son had hip surgery on both hips. So that's been a real challenge during, any health procedures during the COVID times has been a loss and a challenge. So
yeah. Well, it's a big gap when that has been a lot of your activity as family life. I know that was for us, and so I can understand that that's a gap for you when those sports activities are not there, and like Brian said early on, that can be a plus side to that, because it gives other kinds of family time, but there's a loss in there, and we want to make sure to identify and affirm, validate those losses. So thanks so much for sharing from your family. Amy and Eric, how about you all? How has COVID impacted your family, challenges, losses that you've experienced?
I would say we tend to be pretty social. We like to have people at our home often, just kind of throw, everyone bring your own dinner and we'll hang out. And obviously that sort of thing hasn't really been happening as much. And that kind of lost both for us socially, but for our kids too. Our friends' children are their friends. Mm-hmm. So it's an easy throw together every weekend that hasn't been happening for months. And I would also say some of the challenging things around, parenting. I don't know if we're getting there yet, but we're both teachers. And so especially when the pandemic first hit, everyone was at home. We were e-teaching, they were e-learning. There was like times no one can talk because I have to record a video where I'm playing the piano for half an hour. So no sounds, that sort of stuff, I'm sure was hitting everybody, but I think it was kind of an interesting, especially surrounding the schooling. I don't know, anything else you can think of?
I think too, just how different people handle the anxiety and the isolation of it. Like I'm a really social person. And so when you remove your community and your support system, obviously you're still trying to be creative and connect with people on House Party or, Facebook groups or whatever, but it's not the same. And so feeling that loss for us and for our kids, and then just some people handle anxiety less well than others. So I think that's challenging too when I'm running anxious and I've got us like bleaching everything that comes into the house for a while and trying to roll with it and be like, this is reasonable. Yeah, let's do that. It's to be challenging times.
Yes, yes. Well, you talked about the e-learning and how has that impacted your family? And I know you are both teachers. How has that been, the effects of that, trying to do both work and help teach your kids remote learning?
I think we're fortunate in some ways that, well, obviously being both teachers, we have a little bit of experience in their areas that the kids are working in. But like everyone else, going back to, let's say 7th grade math, haven't done that for a while, trying to look up what, these terminologies are that we're not familiar with. And then, oh, right, that's how you do that. But also even just keeping them accountable. I think that's a thing that lots of parents are feeling right now. And I think it's good for us also as teachers to see that other side of it,
Yeah.
To give a lot of grace there, to hopefully that we're getting that on the other end from our girls teachers, because we see how much the kids are banging their heads against the wall to try to finish the things. And at some point, that much time on a screen or even that much time on just working on their own, it's not what they're used to. They haven't had that on their shoulders.
Right.
So I think trying to help them take some of that off of them without taking away the challenge, because we want them to be able to do what they're supposed to do without us doing everything for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a challenge, I'm sure, to navigate that in all that new territory. Well, thank you both for sharing. Let me move to Brandon and Carrie, and let me hear from you some of the challenges you have experienced in your family during this season.
Oh, challenges. So I feel like, when Brenda first started talking, she talked about how things were kind of taken away from the high school age kids and things like that. Brandon and I have had many conversations. I don't know if we've had little pity parties, but we've said, oh, we're so glad that we don't have kids in high school who are trying to use this time to, further their sports and things like that. We feel fortunate. But in the other aspect, we've kind of had those pity parties of, can you imagine if our kids were older and we didn't have them all running around and having so many needs that we need to tend to? Because with them all home every day, all day, I mean, even like church, when it reopened, we were like, whew, we get that hour to ourselves, not trying to watch Zoom and keep them quiet or, things like that. So I think we're kind of, I feel like we're fortunate in some ways that we didn't feel like we experienced as much loss, maybe because our kids maybe didn't feel it as much as we feel like high schoolers would, or, with all the dances, proms, sports, things like that. But we kind of felt like it was hard to get a break because especially in the beginning, grandparents were a little more isolated and things like that. So we just kind of would look at each other and, now what? What do we do now?
Right.
So, and then with the schooling, we're fortunate as well that we both have teaching backgrounds. So I think that has been beneficial. But again, Brandon's teaching from home and the kids are all home, and that's just loud with 3 boys. And I feel like we could teach anybody else's kids, but when it comes to your own, it's just not the same. They just don't respond the same way. So we've had those struggles and a little bit of wanting to pull my hair out with that. But overall, it's what it is, and it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, if you didn't appreciate a teacher before, you probably appreciate him now. And I don't want to be like, oh, pro teacher, this and that, like, on some type of pedestal or anything like that. No, but my goodness, I see my wife, like I try to teach a class, and then like in between my classes, I'll come downstairs and I see her trying to teach our 3 boys all at once. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a task. And it takes a lot of energy and patience, and it can wear on you. And by the time lunchtime hits, it's like, okay, let's have some lunch and everybody take a break and just kind of like relax and everybody cool off.
Then he's no longer hangry and we're all reset for the afternoon.
Like Lorene and I are, as you know, are empty nesters. And so the things we might struggle with, wrestle with through this time are a bit different. Our issues will be a bit different. We'll get into those in the next couple of sessions. But we've often talked about what it would have been like for us trying to do what you guys have been doing when all 4 of our boys were still here at home. And we just kind of stopped because it's really hard to even imagine. So we take our hats off to you that you're here. You seem relatively sane. And that's good.
Relatively.
I want to transition now a little bit from family stuff, and we'll come back to some of that, but to marriage. I'm interested in, if you switch to, instead of talking about family and kids and stuff, talking about marriage. So start back with you, Brandon and Carrie. How has the season of COVID impacted more specifically your marriage? You've covered the tons of stress and dealing with different things, and 3 little boys running around and Brandon trying to teach. And but what have been the stress points that you guys have felt in your between the 2 of you in marriage?
Well, I think, that both of us, we're active. We don't like to sit in the house too long. That's just our personality. And when COVID hit, I mean, it does create some tension, and just having our parents or a babysitter, whatnot, come over, and where the 2 of us can get out of the house for 3 hours, it totally diffuses things. And that's been a big help for us.
And we've had it where we just go for a walk, because this is when you couldn't go to restaurants and things like that, but just having a quiet car, a quiet walk, and a place to have a conversation where we're not, diffusing everything else, it's been good for us. It's amazing what those 2 hours could do just to give us that breath of fresh air again and ready to reconnect and be together. Now, I think too, being home together all the time, since he's teaching remotely, like usually by the end of the summer, I'm kind of like, whew, time to go back to work, honey. I love you, but it's time. Well, that has not happened in a very long time. So he's been home since March, and, we're going on about a year, but,
Right.
I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
I just, there have been times, we've learned, I think it's like being married again, newlyweds again. You kind of start to learn these things like, does he really do that? Or, point out things. And I'm like, does that bug you? But maybe before it didn't, but we're together so much that,
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that, but that's exactly what I would expect would happen, because tensions do build up, but you guys already have discovered implemented a little bit of a strategy to reduce that sort of tension. Eric and Amy, how about you guys? Both teaching at home with your girls at home. If you looked at just under the microscope of just your marriage, how has this time impacted, stressed out, or blessed your marriage?
Well, I would echo what Brandon and Carrie said. When you're home all together all the time, they say communication is a good thing, but when you have a lot more chances to say the wrong thing, a lot more time, sometimes that happens more often than, you find out, for me personally, the way that our working relationship has been, Amy's been part-time most of the time we've been married, and I've been full-time. And so I'm not around at home as much. And so being at home, seeing on one hand, everything she does, and then on the other hand, the way that she does it versus the way that I might do it, finding that out. But I think that also has been a blessing for us, for me in particular, to see how much she does, like, without me knowing, how much of our house is taken care of without any of my help whatsoever. And then, I don't know, what else can you think of?
I mean, I think what you said about communication is big, where if you are together all the time, if someone leaves, like Carrie was saying, if you leave and then you come back, then you've got kind of the space and the time to think like, oh gosh, that wasn't that big a deal. Oh, I'm sure he didn't mean that, or I maybe said that the wrong way. But when you're together all that time and you don't have the opportunity to have that break, and especially if you're not intentional about communicating about, hey, what did you mean by that? Or can you tell me again what, were you upset there? We're both pretty conflict avoidant. So if you don't make those intentional conversations happen, then things can build. And I think for us, just especially when you're kind of in this pressure cooker where you're all trapped at home and you're running anxious about, jobs and health and all these things, those are areas where we felt like, okay, this is hard. We got to really be intentional here, or it's going to be even harder.
Yeah.
How about you guys, Ryan, Brenda? What have you, if you just looked at your marriage in the midst of all this, how's it been?
something like Ryan and I met when we were 12 and we started dating when we were 17. So this isn't new to COVID, but we've always noticed we've been together longer than we've had life apart, really. And we just tend to be very like-minded. And I noticed during this, we were like-minded at our anxiety or where we felt about the virus. We're kind of like-minded about the political, all the stuff going on. So that's been helpful to us because we're kind of a team going at it. I mean, of course, it's not perfect every day, but I mean, I don't feel like this put a stress on the two of us. I feel like we even tightened up that partnership maybe a little bit more. I mean, we had a few things. It was our 20-year anniversary during this, and we had a trip we dreamt of for 20 years to go on, you know. So some things it was just being creative, but where Carrie was mentioning how it is hard to have these high schoolers, where we benefit from that is like we can say at 9 p.m. we're going to watch a show. I mean, we can leave them, you know, and kind of still go have alone time in our home. And so we do get that, and that helps a lot because we are ones that we've always made each other pretty much a priority. So we can still do that, just looks different now. But
let me piggyback on something you said there. You said we're sort of like-minded. You mentioned sort of the virus and all the political stuff and all that. But I was going to ask a question. If each of you each of you couples have from the beginning kind of been on the same page with the virus stuff, meaning protocols, same level of DEFCON 4 awareness or whatever, whether you were in different places as the whole thing started. So Brandon, you're kind of laughing there. How about you guys? Were you always on the same page with that, or did you take a while to get on the same page?
No, we were always on the same page. And what you're bringing up is almost like a big macro issue of virus and this and that. But I will say this, we've always been on the same page. What's the variables out there are like some of our sons' parents are on a different page than us.
Mm-hmm.
So then, like, for instance, my oldest I was driving him to basketball practice the other day, and he's like, why can't I play with my friend? Okay, I won't give the name. And he's almost taking it personally.
Yeah.
And I said, don't worry about it. It's that he likes you and his parents like you. They've been sequestering themselves for the last 9 months, and they're not allowing any play dates.
Yeah.
So it's just a big, we're on the same page with it. But if your social group isn't on the same page with it, it can impact like the parents, us, and it can really impact the kids. And trying to explain that to your 10-year-old isn't that easy either.
Right. You're helping your kids understand that other people are on the same page that your family is.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about, when we were raising our boys, we were worried about, R-rated movies, and if they'd be invited by a friend, we'd have to have a conversation. Now it's about masks or not masks,
Right.
all that sort of stuff. How about you guys, Eric and Amy? Always kind of been together on that stuff?
We've generally been on the same page about it. As Amy mentioned before, she just runs a little more anxious than I do. So from the beginning, I was kind of I guess I'll be the adventurer to go out to Walmart. I was that, and so it wasn't really something that we ever differed on our opinions. And I, echoing what the Peterson said, it's kind of like, when you're driving on the highway, anyone that passes you is a maniac, and anyone that's slower than you is an idiot. I think the mask thing is everyone has their own feeling about the way it should be done or shouldn't. And, we're just trying to, like you guys, figure out with our social group and our kids, friends, parents, and all that, what can we do that gets them to have time together, but also makes everyone feel comfortable, and it's the same for us too,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about, let me just jump into one more question in case you have something to share. We talked about all of you, I know at least there's 3 teachers here brought their work home and had to work out of home for significant periods of time. Ryan, I'm not sure if you've traveled still or have had to work mostly at home, but the whole moving the marriage partner who's usually away working, moving them home, did that create any unique stresses in particular, or was it just kind of a gradually getting used to that for you? What was that adjustment like? Maybe I can have, I don't know who jumps in here. Maybe Brandon and Carrie jump in here.
I just think that, we had to make adjustments. I mean, we live in a house that's big enough where he could find his spot, you know, we could find our spot, and just kind of trying to stay out of each other's way, but also trying to support the other person and what they were doing, because obviously teaching from home was different for him, and me having the kids home was different for me. So trying to support the other person.
Did you find it, Carrie, let me jump in. Did you find it ever frustrating that he was there inside the walls and you still had all three boys trying to corral them and do that, all that stuff?
I don't know if that was more frustrating or finding out how handsy he is. I didn't realize how like handsy he is. And like, I'm just like, you know, there's a time and a place, but he was just, you know, kind of.
Where are we going with this?
You know, I mean, you know, that's just all the time then, you know. So when you leave, it was like that left too. And, you know, so there were definite adjustments, but.
I would really love to walk down that path a little further.
Did you say handy or handsy?
No, I'm not handy.
Handsy. No.
I'm not handy. I know that, so it must be handsy.
So it brought to light the love languages again, I guess, you know, and obviously his is touch, and mine, the acts of service, which I have been able to see more of, which has been a blessing in this. And I think maybe he has picked up some of those because he sees like this stuff never stops. Okay. So in a way, to have him home, I mean, it has been a blessing in that regard.
Well, that's good. That's a blessing.
We'll come back to that topic here in a little bit. So, well, let me, I really thank you guys for starting us off with a lively conversation. And we've all experienced this last 10 months or so in similar ways and yet different ways, because we all have sort of different DNA in our families and different DNA in our marriages. But you know, stress is part of life. We all have stress. You don't have to have a pandemic to feel stress in marriage and family life. It's part of life. It's part of marriage. It's completely normal and predictable to have certain seasons of time when you have financial stress, either due to a job loss or job change, or maybe the stress that comes with having a child who's sick or has surgeries like your son did, Ryan and Brenda, or maybe just the stress of work, you're bringing it home with you. But what's unique about this season, I think, as I've listened to people over the last few months, is that we are experiencing multiple sources of stress all simultaneously. And any one or two of them together is enough to create tension. But when there's 4 or 5 of them all stacked up and you don't know which one you're in at which time, it creates a kind of stress overload at times. And an overload of stress, as probably you've all experienced a little bit, as we've experienced, tends to bring out the worst in us, and even in our relationships, if we're not careful. And the casualties of stress overload can be things like loss of patience, an increase in frustration or anger or conflict, ultimately the loss of joy. So I think that the first step, and you all did a really nice job with this as we ask you questions, but the first step is to actually recognize clearly and identify the sources of our stress, and then to be honest about what we're feeling due to that stress. And I would encourage all of you who are watching today, especially if you've been struggling a bit, maybe you see these 3 couples as having sort of smooth sailing. They kind of have done it really well, but maybe you struggled more. And if the stress and tension has boiled over more than a few times, let me suggest something for you. That is to sit down together sometime and to just talk through what you're feeling. Try not to blame or point fingers and make it somebody's fault. Just make a list, like a literal list of every stress or every loss, every change that you can think of that you've been through, and sort of cluster them into groups. I call them piles, making piles of stress. And I find that most couples who do this, just the act of looking together at the piles of stress and agreeing that that's where they're coming from actually reduces the level of stress, because you realize we're together seeing the same thing. And then once you identify the stressors and how you feel about them, then you're prepared to start to deal with that stress, to make strategies for it, and to deal with it in a more healthy and productive way. And that's where we want to go in our next session that we're going to pick up next time. So we want to thank you, all of you, for watching, and thank our panel here for being with us. And the next session of Marriage RX, we're going to focus on more creating healthy strategies to cope for families and, importantly, marriages. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.